Welcome everyone who's found us, and hi Arty. We're going to be having another conversation about all kinds of stuff. For anyone who doesn't know who you are, Arty, would you like to do a quick intro? I'm sure everyone who's found this does know who you are, but do you want to give a quick intro as to who you are?
Sure. Thanks, James. Well, it's lovely to be here. It's great to chat with you. My name's Arty Morty. That's not my real name, obviously. I'm in Toronto, Canada. I'm gay. I talk about gender identity ideology, and I'm a critic of this new phenomenon that's changing the world. I'm a gay rights activist. I'm involved in LGBT Alliance Canada. I have a YouTube channel, Arty Morty, and I'm on a podcast with the notorious Helen Sandland and the equally notorious Graham Linehan at his YouTube channel, Graham Linehan. Yeah, so that's me. I've been talking about this stuff for a couple of years now. It's really driving me crazy. I think it's a real crisis, what's going on. And I think it's really fascinating that it's taken the world by storm. And I think we really need to educate people about what's going on. It's turned into such a hot button issue. People don't understand why there are so many people now who are speaking out against gender identity ideology. And then on the other side, we've got all these people who just think these are just precious, innocent transgender people who just want to get on with their lives. And there's some truth to both of those sides. I'm very sympathetic to trans people. I know many transgender, transsexual people. I myself experienced gender dysphoria as a child. I was a very girly boy. And I used to work at a trans bar for a little while back in the 90s when it was still called transsexual. And I've worked at a gay bar. I've worked in gay rights organizations. That's me in a nutshell.
Thank you for that. So there's loads of stuff that we'll pick back up on. We were talking before we started recording about what I was aiming to do in starting doing these kind of conversation interview type videos. So broadly, I want them to kind of be things gay men need to know or need to hear, because women and lesbians have been on this for a while, and gay men have kind of come a lot of gay men have come later to this. And I think various people have said about, unfortunately, the decision makers in a lot of places are predominantly men, and in the LGBT community, the gay men are kind of the political force or have been decision making. So actually the getting more men to know what's going on and peaking more gay men will help with achieving more stuff in terms of improving things. So that's kind of broadly what the conversation is to be about, or to include. There's obviously lots of other things. So you've got I think what I think of when I see your videos is you've done so much research, I feel like, or you've read so much, because you kind of talk about like the theory of stuff and the philosophy of things and like different stuff. So sure, your bookcase behind you is actually goes on for a while with lots of other stuff you've read up, but probably lots of you can kind of talk about as a history.
There's another one the other way too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm really interested in informing people. I think a lot about like an imagined audience when we do videos. And I think we should sort of imagine the audience watching this video is, say, a gay guy who is perhaps a trans activist or who is hostile to gender critical people, who maybe doesn't even know what GC is. Somebody who might think that TERFs are bad, that kind of thing. I want to imagine this person who's trying to figure out where our viewpoint comes from. I want to take that person and show them, guide them to our viewpoint. This is sort of my imagined conversation, but I also want to relax and have fun and chat.
Yeah, but I think that kind of how you tell, either thinking of talking to a particular person, or the kind of tools people can have, or not even tools, but like thoughts about how do you broach this subject with people, and what kind of thing would you talk about based on where they're coming from. So from a gay man's perspective, kind of what is your in on the conversation? How would you talk to friends about this if they haven't raised it, or like
that's almost like a fantasy conversation. I think about it so much. I've lost so many friends, and I've just distanced myself and alienated myself from the gay community because there's just so much there's so much controversy around this. I don't feel comfortable around very many gay people, so I think a lot about how to broach the topic with gay men. I'm also single right now, so I go on the dating apps like Grindr and Scruff, and I look at people's profiles in Tinder and whatever. And then if they have like pronouns in their profile, I imagine, gosh, they seem like a nice person, but at some point I would have to broach the topic of, I'm sorry, I believe that there is I'm critical of gender ideology, that kind of thing. So I think the first thing I would tell a gay man, actually, let me back up for a second. I think gay men have a particularly unique perspective on this issue. So I think it's really important to reach gay men. So dear imagined viewer who is a gay man who is hostile to us critics of trans ideology, I think the first thing I want to explain to you is that this is something new. We're not talking about old-fashioned transsexualism. This is a brand new phenomenon that has emerged, and it's emerged in the age of social media. You know, I used to work at a trans bar before the age of social media. I knew many transsexuals, but when the term it sort of drifted from transsexual to transgender, the concept shifted. A transsexual woman was a man who experienced such distress about the sex of his body, opted to undergo a very concrete procedure to try to identify as a member of the opposite sex. We were keenly aware that there were males and females, and somebody was feeling like they wanted to cross the aisle, so to speak, and was taking steps to at least achieve a superficial appearance of having done so. So we were keenly aware of what sex was. We were keenly aware that these were very sympathetic people who were experiencing deep distress, who were undergoing a very serious journey to try to improve their mental health. This was a very compassionate, sympathetic community of people, and a very, very small one. That's sort of an idea that I want to establish with people. Nowadays, we have a whole new concept, which is that sex isn't real anymore. We have this new concept that's emerged that is being spread like wildfire on the internet, on social media, that there's no such thing as being a male. There's no such thing as being a female, that this is all, it's all being deconstructed. And we can get to that later, all the problems that causes.
So you mentioned like working in a transsexual bar. I mean, so having been to kind of gay bars when I was at university and known transsexuals, yeah, minority, like one or two, and everyone knew who they were because there's only two, maybe two that people knew of. And actually I was at, I think I've mentioned it somewhere before, I was like a project manager for the Pride Festival in Lincoln after I was at university there for Lincolnshire, and the chair was a trans woman who we only ever known as her, but had children who still called him dad, and very, an understanding of what his sex was, and that's what made him identify as trans, because he knew, and it wasn't. Right. I don't think we were even using trans; it was transgender or transsexual still. But
or another word that used to be bandied about that we're not allowed to use anymore. You know the word.
That was part of the name of one person that people referred to. That's how they knew him.
That's right.
And that's how he would describe. That's the name he would use as well. But yeah, in terms of the working actually at a trans bar that had, I mean, what kind of numbers are we talking? What was the sense of an understanding of part of the community, or that community as a sub community?
It was a sub community. It was within the boundaries of the gay village in this city. I won't name what city it was, but it wasn't Toronto. And it was a very small bar. It was a kind of, there was very little money. A lot of these people were working in the sex trade. There was a mix of like very, very feminine homosexuals and middle-aged people who seemed that they were straight. Yeah, it was. I was only there for a few months. They were lovely people. In the 90s, it was a strange place. A lot of the clientele would be straight men, or ostensibly straight men, who wanted to have sex with people who presented femininely but who had penises.
And they knew what they were going to be getting.
Yeah, and they were nervous. So there was most of the clientele would be these very nervous, probably like married men who are sneaking off because they're trying to have sex with back then we would use terms we wouldn't use anymore, like she-male and stuff. But sorry, I said something. I only used that word in reference to having used it in the 90s. Yeah, so it was a learning experience. I kind of forgot about the whole thing. And then, that was way back in the 90s. And then this all started happening where we started seeing gender identity ideology just taking over everything. And then it just came back, yeah.
In terms of, I'm just thinking whether it was still something we would have talked about in the 90s. The kind of the gender benders, and that how we would talk about bending gender and nonconformity. And was it, was it still, do you think we were still talking in that way still in the 90s that actually?
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's another a point that I want to get through to this imagined gay man who's like, what's up with you people? This gender ideology isn't usually actually about gender expression. Gay men are keenly aware of gender nonconformity and gender bending. Many gay men grew up very feminine. Many gay men like to play with gender expression. Drag is everywhere in our culture. We even play with pronouns. We call each other she and things like that playfully. We're very keenly aware of the diversity of gender expression in men. And we're very sympathetic to men who are naturally, innately, right from childhood, inclined to feminine things. You know, there are some men who, since right from infancy, are just very, very naturally feminine and very girly. And they experience a lot of distress as children, and they experience a lot of discrimination. A lot of homophobia is also gender discrimination. Gender nonconformity and homosexuality are very much connected. I think it's totally reasonable for a gay man to be deeply sympathetic to anybody whose gender atypical or whose gender expression is not the norm or is not sort of what's typically expected to be masculine. This is wonderful and this is great, and I celebrate this in every way possible. One of the misunderstandings about people who think that us critics are evil is that we don't like diverse gender expression. That's not true. It's that we think diverse gender expression doesn't automatically exclude you from being a man. If you're a man who wears a dress, David Bowie and Prince are my two gods, and they're the most gender non-conforming, very feminine presenting artists, and they're wonderfully celebrated. I love 80s music and the new wave scene. That was as gender bending as it got, you know. I also like a little bit of hair metal, and that's pretty gender bending, you know. Have you seen Poison, the band? They are just straight up cross-dressers, you know. This is all great, but that's not really what transgender is. There's something very different when you're saying that you're a member of the opposite sex because of your gender expression. That's a new concept that didn't exist. You know, back in the 90s, there was some mixing between gay men and lesbians because there were just a lot more gay bars back then. And like butch lesbians would be very masculine presenting, but we wouldn't assume that they were men, and we wouldn't try to date them as though they were like trans men, and therefore, you know, and a lot of gay men were dressing up in women's clothing. It's not like lesbians were sleeping with them because, well, if they're presenting in women's clothes, they must be a woman. That just wasn't happening. Your gender expression was totally separate from your sex. You could be the butchest, most masculine presenting lesbian. Everyone could still tell that you're female and that you're a lesbian and not a trans man. You could be the most feminine gay man. No one's saying, oh, you must therefore be a woman, you know? Yeah.
And almost I say the point of it, but almost the point of it, or the foundation of the point of it was because you knew what your actual sex was and you knew what their actual sex was. It's not just that it was the disconnect or distinction between sex and gender presentation. It was, like
you're riffing on it. To be a woman presenting in men's clothing is an act of defiance. Yes. But to be just a man presenting in men's clothing is just an act of conformity. You know, there's an irony behind a lot of the trans ideology because we can see that these are, you know, we can perceive that these are males who are dressing like females. So we think they're making a bold statement about gender. Mm-hmm. But when they say that, well, they're just women and they don't want you to even see that they're male, that's actually negating the sort of bravery in a sense. You know what I mean?
So what, such a small question already. What changed?
What changed? Social media changed. Social media changed.
I was going to say, in terms of the either the gay scene or the gay community, particularly, obviously, I mean, we can get into. I mean, I've obviously read all the postmodernism books. I'll bore people to death with postmodernism. But in terms of first of all, in terms of the gay scene or the gay community, and that change from we're all very clear what our sex is, and we'll play around with gender presentation, knowing these are stereotypes, and we're not restricted by those, to actually the conformity now is the gender stereotype determines what they think your sex is.
And I think I 2 points I want to make. I mean, it was a confluence of a lot of things. The time we're in now is a strange confluence of a lot of things that happen to coincide. One of them is that the gay rights lobby, the sort of the machinery of gay rights activism, was running out of causes. We achieved so many victories. We've achieved so much equality. Gay marriage was the big one, of course, in marriage equality, but workplace protections, housing protections, and just outreach, media representation. There's so much gay, so many gay, lesbian, and bisexual characters in the media. This is all great. We've achieved so much. So we need new causes to keep this machinery going because there's money involved. So that's one thing. We're looking for new frontiers to be activists about, and we're running out of things to be activists about. And that's an uncomfortable position for gay people to be in. We've always considered ourselves defiant and political, but we've achieved all of our political goals, and now it's not a defiant thing to be gay anymore. It's totally fucking normal. So we're looking for something that's extra. Like, what's the extra thing? Because it's just normal to be gay now. So we're seizing on trans.
Yeah, especially if you're a professional gay. Like I did networking for gay professionals, but if you're a professional gay, where like it's actually either your job or a lot of what you do is about, particularly in the lobbying and campaigning area, it's almost like you are gay professionally. And it's kind of, if you don't have the thing that's going to be your job, or your cause, then you've got to find something else.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like all these charities that are working to eradicate diseases. What happens when you've eradicated your disease? You got to pack up shop and you got to shut down the charity, and they don't want to do that. Like if our job is not entirely done, gay rights activism, and it's come back, of course, which is why I've co-founded a gay rights activist movement organization. But that's one issue. The other one is that social media has really messed up people's, it's just created crazy things.
Yeah.
And the other one, well, these two things happen. Social media screwed things up. The gay rights lobby was looking for a new cause and desperately trying to find something. But this kind of ties into the difference between sex and gender a little bit. Remember, I was saying to our imagined gay man that trans isn't really about gender expression. What I mean is that very often it's actually about sex. And I don't mean sex like biological sex. I mean sex like fucking. Like very often, if you're trying to express if you want other people to think you're a member of the opposite sex, it's because sex is involved somewhere. It's because you're sexually aroused by pretending you're a member of the other sex, or it's because you're trying to attract members. You're trying to attract people who are attracted to the opposite sex. So we have to remember that. There's all this talk about gender, but really at the end of the day, there's a lot of sex going on around trans. And this is important to understand because the vast majority of people who identify as transgender, now you know this and I know this these days, are not gay. These are not gay feminine men. These are straight men. Straight men constitute the vast majority of people who identify as trans or trans women. This is an important thing for gay men to understand because we're so used to being around drag and gender nonconformity. We really associate trans as an extreme expression of gender nonconformity. And there are those kinds of transsexuals. There are feminine gays who are, who even graduate from drag to getting sex reassignment surgery and things like that. That exists, but that's actually a small population of the transgender community. The vast majority are jockish masculine men who are role-playing as members of the opposite sex for reasons that they don't really want to talk about publicly because they might be perceived as seedy. So that's an important thing. And this group of people, this group of men, straight, white, middle-aged, often middle-class or rich men, have these sexual paraphilias where they want to, role-play as women. They want to imagine that they inhabit women's bodies. And they're looking to legitimize that paraphilia. So they've found an opening. These men found the gay rights movement's looking for a new cause. Well, these cross-dressing paraphiles are like, okay, well, we'll be your cause. So that's what happened. And that's a very dangerous thing for some people to talk about because people want to imagine that the word trans is very wholesome, but just like gay isn't just an identity or a feeling, it's a sexuality. If you're gay, that means because you engage in sex acts with members of the same sex. And oftentimes, if you're transsexual, it's because you have sexual fantasies about being the opposite sex.
I think so it made me thinking that difference in the group. So the homosexual, transsexual, that kind of people that gay men will likely be more aware of because that is typically the T that we new
Mhm.
and can understand in a way, because if you're that's the gender dysphoric child who doesn't grow out of it and has to find a way to cope, that's
Mhm.
the kind of, we can understand that, or gay men can understand that more, or recognize that more, I guess, if they've either been gender non-conforming or effeminate as a child, or whether they were full on gender dysphoria or not.
Mhm.
Like, I think the other group that's kind of tapped itself on
Mhm.
is alien in a way to gay men, because largely, I mean, again, stereotypes, but I'm just thinking most of my friends are gay men or women. I don't have very many straight male friends. I never had a lot of gay men will be like that. So I think the the other type of trans identifying male, who is a straight, usually older guy, is
Mhm.
not necessarily going to be typically, out of
Yeah.
a male
Oh,
perspective.
totally. So like
They're not in that group.
gay
Yeah.
men are living downtown often. They're single. And most trans women, gay men just don't understand that the vast majority of trans women are middle-aged married men out in the suburbs with a house, and they're like accountants or bankers or something. They have office jobs. You don't see them because they're not moving in the same circles as you. They're out in the burbs. They're middle-aged. They're suburban. This is just so, I think a lot of gay men, when you say things like, why wouldn't you let a trans woman use a woman's changing room, it's like, because it's a middle-aged man, not a feminine gay.
I'm not thinking of that group. I think the population at large, when you look at the different surveys and people are asked about acceptance, and the way they're answering is they are thinking about the homosexual, transsexual, really effeminate, no risk
Mhm.
to anyone, trans person of the past, transsexual person of the past, and
Mhm.
not, and even more so for gay men, because that's not who they, or when by the time they're interacting with that group, they're already there presenting as if they're a woman, and trying to be actively involved and going to the gay bars, and it's that,
Yeah.
it's
So
like
this
this
is like, really,
healthy,
people have to get that in their heads.
yeah. And it seems so, it's that, I think that's a difficult thing, or why it kind of provokes the reaction from particularly the kind of political gays and the Stonewall gays and the activisty types,
Mhm.
artists, actors, whoever else, is because it's so, it sounds so far-fetched, because it's not the group of men they understand transsexuals to be.
Yeah.
So it's like their default is I don't recognize myself in that, therefore it can't possibly be what you're
Yeah,
saying.
it's counterintuitive. It's kind of, you can intuit that some men, usually gay men, or some men are just very, very feminine and they're distressed, and they would be more comfortable if they already have so much more behaviorally and aesthetically in common with women.
Yeah.
Then why can't they just live as though they're women? Like, why can't we just, like, why would their biology not matter? Why would their biology matter so much when they're clearly already so feminine? This is what people are imagining. Like, why are you so hung up on something so insignificant as the fact that they happen to be male? When they look female, they act female, they want to be female, it would make them happier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's very intuitive. People can intuit that, and I understand that. I totally. This other phenomenon of, like, very often military men, or athletes, very aggressive, very typically very masculine men, or very computer nerdy kind of men, suddenly announcing out of the blue that they've had a name change and they're wearing women's clothes. You can't intuit what's going on, because the psychological phenomenon there is very, very different.
Yeah.
And that, of course, you know this, I know this, but dear imagined viewer, Mr. Gay Man, this is called autogynephilia. And the idea is that straight men are sexually attracted to female bodies. 98% of men are attracted to female bodies. Sometimes that sexual attraction kind of targets your own body. You don't just want to find a woman and have sex with a woman and partner with a woman. That feeling is kind of stuck inside your own body. So you become sexually attracted to yourself. If you're sexually attracted and romantically attracted to your own body and you're straight, you're going to want to imagine that you're inside a woman's body. This is what happens. It's an introverted kind of sexuality. And this is very, very hard for people to intuit. And it's also very embarrassing for these men to admit. These are often hyper masculine, jockish men who pride themselves on their machismo a lot of the time. And when they have to admit that they're deeply sexually aroused at the idea of wearing feminine clothing and being and having breasts and female genitalia and all this stuff, when this can be really, really difficult on their sense of identity. So they break off and they say, oh, I'm really a woman. They kind of create a new identity because they can't reconcile, I'm a jockish man like Caitlyn Jenner, an Olympic athlete, is having a hard time just admitting that they are, that they like to cross-dress. It's a cross-dresser. Was always a cross-dresser. There's an interesting statistic about Caitlyn Jenner is that, when Caitlyn Jenner came out as Caitlyn Jenner, there's a specific date when that happened. And you can Google Bruce Jenner cross-dresser, and you can go to those sort of advanced search tools, and you can filter for only results from before he came out as transgender, and you'll just find it was an open secret that Bruce Jenner was a fetishistic cross-dresser, and then came out as Caitlyn Jenner late in life, and then would say things that, like, when I put on women's clothes and I look in the mirror, I become so sexually aroused, I want to have sex with myself. That's an almost verbatim quote from Caitlyn Jenner. That's what's going on. This is not somebody who's suffering from somebody may be suffering from distress over this, may have dysphoria, but that's what's going on. And we really have to hammer this concept home. It's so important. We're talking about sexual paraphilias. And what gay men, I think, kind of already know that, because if you look at Grindr, we know that this is very much about sex. I was not single for most of last year, and then became single towards the end of the year. So I was off of the dating apps for a while, suddenly back on them again. And even in that short period of time, oh my God, like, the apps are overrun with cross-dressers and transgender. And what's really interesting is that Grindr is an app for men to have sex with men or to date men. Oh, so if you're on Grindr, then you know that you're a man.
Yeah.
And if you're on Grindr looking for trans women, you know that they're men, because you're a man if you're on Grindr, and who you want to have sex with is a man if they're on Grindr. And there's no distinction between trans and cross-dresser, really. Yeah. The kinds of people who go on Grindr looking for trans and cross-dressing sex partners, they don't care what your pronouns are. They know that you're male.
Well, like I said before, it's because of your sex, not in spite of your sex. I think the difference with the homosexual, transsexual of old, well, still now, but what we knew as trans, and the AGP men, and I think this is a thing that population at large, but gay men who aren't peaked yet, haven't kind of grasped in terms of the difference, is that I'm thinking that from how you were talking about it, that it's the connection and application of the stereotype. For the homosexual, transsexual, these are males who have characteristics, behaviors, whatever, that would be stereotypically seen as feminine, and therefore end up down that road. Whereas the AGP men don't have those characteristics. They are applying those things to themselves, or they are dressing in a way that is a stereotypically sexy woman way, in their view, to become that thing, rather than, you see what I mean? One is
like, I am so naturally feminine, I might be more comfortable moving through the world if people imagine that I was a woman. And the other one is the opposite. It's, I'm really masculine, but I'd love to imagine that I'm a woman. And I do that by taking feminine stereotypes and putting them on myself. I put on women's clothes because women's clothes are designated as things women wear. So if I put them on, I can imagine that I'm a woman, So they're using the stereotypes of femininity to try to achieve womanhood, whereas gay, homosexual, transsexuals are naturally feminine, and they're just trying to sort of say that they're women so that they can feel comfortable.
And then, I'd like to talk some more about kind of the apps, and like particularly Grindr. Like you said, it's an app for men, but it's not anymore. They don't even promote themselves as that anymore. I think when they did, you'd have pictureless profiles of men who are otherwise straight acting, or on the down low, or however they would want to talk about it, who know discreet. What they're there for, discreet. And even if you had men, the homosexual, transsexuals on there, it was male and you knew what it was. And there are other apps that kind of have more obviously trans categories that would be that. I think the shift now, I was talking to Sal Grover a bit about this in terms of apps, and that I've not been on dating apps for a bit, but had, as part of this kind of having these conversations and kind of researching and having another look again, particularly when I think Sal had said it, and then she realized it's not that case anymore, that actually is Grindr. Does even Grindr even talk about itself as a gay men's app anymore? And it doesn't. You can go on and put whatever sex and gender identity you want to put on. So you can be a heterosexual woman and be on Grindr. And it's kind of, I think that's the shift in the more recent years, it's not just there are men on there who present as women, and there are some other men who quite like that, attracted to homosexual transsexuals, and they're presenting that way because they know they'll get the straight men.
Yeah.
And you've got the AGP males who kind of want that. They almost want the validation from men in the same way, maybe. But then you've also then got women who identify as men, who are then putting themselves onto a essentially gay dating / hookup app. And then the whole, but you're a girl.
Yeah. So the whole thing is like, the idea of sex is being completely deconstructed and ripped apart. This is the difference between old gay rights and trans rights and this new gender identity ideology that's taking over the world. It's really quite jarring that even Grindr won't officially say that this is an app for men, because the idea that you're acknowledging that there's a difference between men and women is verboten now. And this is a really strong point that gay men need to understand, is that those gay activist organizations, the professional gays, they are actively hostile to the fact that homosexuality exists. Because this new movement that they tacked themselves to is a movement that's trying to just completely pretend that there's no such thing as biological sex, that you can declare yourself masculine or feminine, and that's the category that determines whether you're gay or straight. It determines how you're recognized in the world. And this is a crazy stupid thing, because homosexuality is all about being a male who is sexually attracted to males. Everybody knows the difference between a masculine woman and a man. And I'm not gay because I'm sexually attracted to masculine traits. I'm sexually attracted to males, and I mean more masculine clothing. I can tell the difference between a man and a woman because that's how sexuality works. Sexuality is very much, it's a billion years of evolution. We can sense with finely honed detection whether you're male or female, and that is deeply rooted in what our sexuality is. So this idea that we can just replace sex with gender in terms of sexuality, unless you're genuinely bisexual, and not a lot of people are, that's just not true. And this is very important because we're being told by gay rights organizations that it's wrong to be gay. We're being told that you have to start having sex with trans men, with females who self-identify as male based on nothing but their self-declaration. And that is just ripping the gay community apart. And it's just not working in the real world. Gay men mostly aren't gonna, they're not even gonna try it once, or maybe they will and be like, no. But the activist groups, they're not listening to you. They don't care. They're pushing this ideology. I
tweeted a little like a axis of whether you believe the lies or whether you know the truth, and then whether this is everything you do or whether it's kind of peripheral to what you do. And I think there are particularly younger people who have been swept up with and go along with, you are literally in the wrong body, or they've kind of almost don't know better, and they're kind of brainwashed. They've been taken by the cult kind of group. You come to Scientology as well. I think
that's my jam.
There's that group, but then the Stonewalls and the professional gays and the lobbyists and and even, I'll come back onto him. That group are this is massively most of what they do, but they know the truth.
Yeah.
And like the Davey Wavy video about they renamed it to kind of oral sex with a trans man, and it's like you can see in his face while he's talking to this trans man about how to give oral sex to a female. You can see in his face, it's like this is not gay. How you do, and this is someone like I used to watch Davey Wavy when he was first on YouTube. I had a flatmate once who was a friend of Davey Wavy's, and he did some really good, like, kind of not cutting edge exactly, but like talks a lot about sexual health and kind of gay topics and stuff on YouTube, and there wasn't loads of that then. This is like over a decade ago, and now it's kind of, why is a relatively prominent gay YouTuber who's done so much stuff that's of benefit to gay males doing a video with someone who is very clearly a woman about how a gay man can go down on a woman.
Teaching a gay man to learn to like it. That's the thing. Where this is conversion therapy. You're teaching gay men to learn to not be gay anymore because of this new religion. That is just so crazy. And that's just not how sexuality works. It's a fundamental biological thing that we're gay.
Yeah.
And but there's a term that Kathleen Stock uses. Kathleen Stock's a feminist philosopher in the UK. For those of you who don't know, somehow, she's amazing.
If you don't know who Kathleen Stock is, pause the video now, go to Amazon, buy Kathleen's book, read it, and then come back.
I still haven't read it.
Don't you?
No, I haven't read it. Well, I mean, I don't know. There's a small issue or two around Kathleen Stock. I think she's a very good person, but
she's lovely. In real life, she's
oh, that's great. She just, yeah, I'm really glad she got the OBE as well. But she talks about immersive fiction, you know, sort of role play. We know a trans woman is really a man. Mm-hmm. We're immersing ourselves in their fiction as an act of compassion, or as a way for us to show that we're good, upstanding citizens. And this is the good thing you do to be a good, upstanding liberal, to be a good, upstanding gay, to be a good, upstanding member of the LGBT. You immerse yourself in trans people's fiction as an act of compassion to them. But when the problem is, who is immersing themselves in the fiction and who is believing the fiction? You know, it's a lot like when you're in a religion. Some people are true believers and some people are just there for the community. You know, some people are like, oh yes, you know, the sacrament is literally transforming into Jesus's flesh in my mouth, or whatever, those little wafers, you know. And some people are just playing along, and some people are just being nice because they don't want to hurt grandma's feelings, and grandma believes in this, that kind of thing, right? It's a whole smorgasbord. And that's what's going on with trans. There's this different groups of people who have different levels of belief, but by and large, people don't believe it literally. They just think they have to profess to believe it. They have to immerse themselves in this fiction as a kindness. And why wouldn't you? Well, the problem there is so all of us adults are playing in this immersive fiction as an act of kindness. But the next generation, they are going into schools, they are teaching toddlers and infants that this is literally true. They're teaching children that biological sex isn't real at all. And not just to be polite and pretend it's not real. It literally is not real. And they are indoctrinating children into this. And when you're being indoctrinated from infancy into this, that means you don't know the difference between politely playing along with a fiction and what's true or not. That is dangerous as fuck. And it is so aggressive what's going on. There's so much money being poured into gender identity ideology. And it's all being poured into going into schools and teaching kids from the age of, from like 4. You know, it's astonishing, the machinery going around that's trying to not just say, let's be kind to people who have gender dysphoria, but let's train the entire world to pretend that biological sex doesn't exist. This is fucking children up. They literally don't know what it means to be gay or straight anymore. They're growing up, they're becoming 11, 12, 13, and they're going to therapists. And they're saying, I don't understand. I'm only, I'm attracted to some men, but not other men. And they don't have the language to say the men that you're not attracted to are women who have he, him pronouns, and the men that you are attracted to are fucking men, they don't know what homosexuality is. They're genuinely confused. So that's really fucking dangerous. But of course, the other danger is we're ascribing transgenderism to children now. The concept of being a transsexual or, that is an adult phenomenon. We had Stephanie Davies Arai on my podcast just this last week, me and Graham and Helen's podcast, not my podcast, sorry. And she put it so well when she said she's an activist for this cause, and she's wonderful. For those of you who don't know, Transgender Trend is her website. She said, the concept of transgender is an adult concept. This is an entirely adult concept. You have to know what sex is. You have to know that you're transcending it. You have to understand that it's often rooted in sexuality and sex drive. Playing with what sex you are and playing pretensies that you're the opposite sex is very much about sexual role play. Whether you're comfortable with that or not, that's just a matter of fact. It's not always the case, but it's often the case. This is not for kids. Yes. But when they're saying if it's about gender and not about sex, they're saying some boys are naturally feminine, therefore they're transgender. Some girls are naturally masculine, therefore they're transgender. And that's dangerous because they're putting them onto a pathway to give them sex changes. And what I think a lot of gay men don't understand is when they hear about trans kids, I can't stand the term trans kids because there's no such thing as a trans
child.
No, an adult can choose to identify as transgender if they have whatever situation in their life that might help alleviate their distress. But you can't ascribe transgenderism to a child. It is an adult condition, and it's not innate. You're not born transsexual. Like you can't. I think homosexuality, it appears to be, if not innate, then unchangeable. You know, and it seems to have expressions that come right from in utero, even. But transgender is not like that. So when you call someone a transgender kid, you're trying to pretend that you can imagine that when they grow up, they're going to want a sex change. And that's not true. What you're doing is you're telling that child that when they grow up, you're going to give them a sex change because you don't like their gender expression, or you don't think their gender expression is natural. But what's really important for gay men to understand is when they refer to trans kids, I think gay men are thinking of them, this other group of people, those people who are trans. We should be nice to those kids. Dear imagined gay man viewer, trans kids are you. They're gay kids being relabeled as trans and reprocessed onto a different pathway. This is really fucking important. Every time you hear the word trans kids, that means kids who are proto-gay, kids who are highly gender nonconforming, and who are in all likelihood, not 100% guaranteed, but are very, very highly likely to grow up to be homosexual men or homosexual women. Trans kids is you're taking gay kids and you're diverting them onto medical sex changes. Yeah.
I think it's making me think of the thing we said earlier about that difference between the homosexual transsexuals was you are an effeminate, stereotypically effeminate male, and that is one thing. And then but as an AGP man, you're wearing the stereotype, you're choosing to wear the stereotype. I think that's with the trans umbrella being this one thing, is you've got essentially gender non-conforming, or as far as gender dysphoria, children they're just the way they are, and we're just deciding what they are based on how much they fit a stereotype, but they're just being how they are, has been lumped under the same umbrella as people who are not gender non-conforming but have put that on themselves as a presentation or as a costume or as however you want to talk about it, as opposed to just being who they are. But they've been lumped under the same trans umbrella.
Yeah, it's two very different groups of people. So yeah, it's the two types there are, and historically they were very far apart from each other. You know, these like sort of like in the United States, they're often African American or Latin American, very feminine gays who identify as transgendered. They stayed far away from the middle-aged man who would, you know, come downtown late at night on a business trip and put on women's clothes and, you know, walk down the streets kind of thing. Or, you know, this is just two different groups of people, and they're almost so. Autogonophilic AGP trans women tend to be stereotypically masculine. The most common career for them is military. You know, these are army guys and jocks, whereas trans women tend to be very feminine. I'd imagine they're you know, and in very typically, you know, kind of pink ghetto-ish kind of work. You know, autogonophiles are out in the suburbs. They're married. They're middle-aged. They have children. They're predominantly white. Trans women, these are the opposite. They're downtown. They're often single. They're feminine, they're gay, they're not married, they're disproportionately not white. And yeah, so it's just the completely two almost polar opposite demographics. And when we said LGBT, we meant the gays who are identifying as trans, you know? We didn't mean the middle-aged straight guys. Yeah.
I think it's the that not disconnect exactly, but just almost a lack of considering that it's not one thing, because the kind of the gay men particularly, but the LGBT community, especially gay men, has been, I've talked about this before, but that it's protect the team, and we're all fighting for our rights because of our collective, you know, the similarities, even though lesbians and gay men are very different most of the time. There's a fight there that we're all on the same team for, and we protect the team. Now, there was a T added to the team, and then what the T has changed, and now you have a new generation, or a couple of generations now, of younger LGBT people and LGBT community, however broad that is going to be. The labels are changing, the meanings are changing, but it's the team, and you have to be on the right side and fight for the team without really definitely not questioning, you know, gay authorities, LGBTQ plus authority figures about what the team is, but not even questioning yourself. I think that's a big shift.
Yeah.
In terms of the and that's probably a bit of a generational thing as well, but that young people not questioning authority and kind of it's why are people going along with it? And I think that coming back to the Scientology thing, which I know you love Scientology, and I've obviously watched Leah Remini's stuff, and it's having been brought up Catholic, and I'm very much an atheist. And you were saying before about people go, I didn't go to church as a kid and as a teenager because I actually believed. It was because it's where I saw my friends and I did stuff and knew people. It was a community. It wasn't the faith or anything particularly. I mean, I can do the whole philosophical from a theological academic point of view conversation stuff, but it's almost like who was it? Oh, probably several people. There's someone prominent that's talked about, in order to understand a lot of Western literature, you need to have read the Bible, because poetically there's a lot of stuff that's going to come from it. So there's that.
I think it was Dawkins who said that, but yeah,
I think it was Dawkins. But the parallels with I was going to say religions and cults, bit of a blurring line there.
Belief systems.
But the parallels with how the machinery of the LGBT lobby have become so similar to how a cult operates. And Scientology obviously is the one that's people are quite, will know about and think of, oh, is that a religion? Because actually it's presented itself as a religion, but it's a cult. And I know you've spoken before about it. Is this something you've read?
Oh yeah, I've been obsessed with Scientology for years and years and years. I was one of those. I got in the mid 2000s when everybody did, in the mid noughts, is that what you call it? When Richard Dawkins's The God Delusion came out and there was all this sizzling press about the new atheist movement, I got really into it. I've always been an outspoken atheist. I've always been critical. I'm a critical thinker, and I'm a big fan of critical thinking and reason. And I'm quite hostile to, to belief systems that undermine the well-being of humanity. I'm a humanist as well. And so Scientology is such a great example of belief systems gone wrong. It's a cult. It's a dangerous cult. It's a shockingly crazy cult. So it's really fascinating to see how people get roped into it. Perfectly decent, perfectly intelligent people can get sucked into these outrageously insane belief systems. Like Scientology involves this crazy, unhinged space opera and just outrageous, immoral behavior. You have to throw away all your money. You have to throw away all your friends. You have to become a rabid activist for Scientology. You have to invent all this new terminology and language. You have to dedicate your whole life to it. And doesn't this sound like trans? You're just all in. Your whole life is just jargon and terminology, and obsessed with activism for it. And all this stuff is just it's deeply immersive. Is that word again? Immersive fiction. When you're in Scientology, you're so surrounded by language and lingo and jargon that you're just so in it. It's like oh my God, TV shows like Game of Thrones there's just so much language, right? Or Harry Potter's a great example. There's just all these spells, all these words, all this whole universe. It's so rich and deep that you're just immersing yourself in it. Scientology is like that, and so is trans. They've got this whole entire mythology they built around the magical belief that biological sex is this evil, hostile thing, and we have these magical genders, and there's this evil, sinister universe that's out to tell us that we actually have a biological sex. It's fucking crazy.
There's the two things that are kind of a parallel with the Scientology specifically, but cults generally, but that kind of immersive nature of it, and so you don't get told the top level crazy on day one in Scientology. You are led in. So by the time you get to that, you're locked in financially. You've lost your friend. Like, you are pulled in and locked in before as it gets. And you kind of, it builds around you. So there's this immersive element of it that's kind of similar in if someone sat down and kind of told you everything, like
right at the beginning, you'd be like, what the fuck? No.
Like with the gender
And it's
identity.
the same with trans. If someone sits, it's like it's bit by bit, I call it heart washing. People call it brainwashing, but I have this theory that it's really heart washing, because what they're doing is convincing you to like their team, not necessarily to believe their beliefs with your brain, to like their beliefs. So in Scientology, what happens when you get into it is they sort of love bomb you. You know, they give you like light therapy. You know, they give you these interview sessions and they give you some treatments and spa stuff, and it makes you feel good. You're like, oh, this is nice. These are nice people. They're giving me therapy. And then they start telling you that they're like on a mission to save the world and that they're doing good and they're spreading goodness. And they're like, oh, this is great. I like this. These are my people. And you build allegiance and they become your tribe. And once you have a tribal allegiance with a group of people, this is the sort of, humans are, you know, we're evolved to be very tribal. We have in groups and out groups and us's and thems. Once you've created a tribal allegiance with these fellow Scientologists, no idea what their beliefs are, but I like them. You know, they're giving me therapy. They're making me feel good. They're telling me I'm doing great. They're telling me great things. This is my people. Once that locks in, that sort of, once your emotions say that this is your people and that there are bad people who are out to hurt your people, you can get roped into so much crazy shit, you know, because at that point, someone comes along who's an outsider who says, oh, those people, your new people, your Scientologists, they're doing bad things. And you're like, you know, these are my people. You're saying bad things. And then they'll give you an example of a bad thing that the Scientologists are doing. And your heart says, I don't want to hear this, because that will make me not want to be on my team anymore. And my team is my team. You know, you're trying to draw me away from my team. So I don't want to hear you telling me that they're doing something bad, because you're tricking me. You're trying to make me go over to your team. And I don't want to be on your team because I'm on my team, right? So this is sort of, your heart says, this is my team and I have to stick with my team. And if evidence tells you you should probably be on the other team, you should probably be on the not Scientologist team, you're just going to reject that evidence. So that's how people get roped further and further into it. And that's what's going on with transgender. The heart washing started with lesbians and gays. There's such a wellspring of love and support for gays and lesbians now. The gay rights movement has been just monumentally successful, and there's been just such a huge shift in social and cultural norms and mores. And there's a tremendous sense of sort of apology in society for what gay people have gone through in society. So there's just this huge outpouring of support and protectiveness that society seems to feel on a superficial level, at least, or at least they want to demonstrate that they're pro-gay rights. I think there's actually still a lot of homophobia. I think that's actually kind of a strange and contradictory thing, that people are demonstrating so much gay pride, but also exhibiting some deep-rooted homophobia. But anyways, so there's that's hackable. If there's a thing, a cause that everybody likes, there's another cause that will try to attach itself to it and steal some of that glory for itself. And that's what trans is, you know? Trans is saying, you have love for gays and lesbians? Well, we're also part of that group. We're the T. We're right next to the LGB. No LGB without the T is what people say all the time. That's not the same. Middle-aged men who have sexual fantasies for cross-dressing are not the same thing as same-sex attracted people. These are two very different phenomena. And this new thing, gender ideology, that says sex doesn't even exist, is actively hostile to homosexuals and is telling us that we have to train ourselves, you know, to muff dive. I loved when Simon Fanshawe yesterday said muff dive. That made me laugh. To see someone so poised and wonderful as him say that just seems great. But anyways, yeah, so there's an opening there. First, you get convinced that this is part of your team and you're tribally loyal, and then you start to get convinced crazier and crazier things, that like you're not just being nice to trans people, you're believing that they're literally the opposite sex, and then you're believing that they're the most vulnerable people in the world, and on and on and on. Whereas if you were just told right at the front, you know, there's no such thing as biological sex, everybody is exactly what they say they are. You know, some people are no sex at all, and we should be giving surgeries to children to fix their bodies. You just look at them like they were crazy, you know?
And for those who are like the allies kind of quadrant, who are kind of, it's not really a major part of their life. They are kind of on the outside. They'll maybe have heard about it at work or whatever. And they kind of believe the lies because they're not really looking into it. They kind of, it's peripheral to them, and they can just do the be kind on the edges, and that's kind of enough that kind of validates the next group. But I think the other element of the immersive nature of it that you're talking about, I think, is the generational, or the kind of multiplies because the generational element is that sense of belonging to a community and identifying with a group because you want to feel like you belong. And then that's that then is fed by that, you know, the love bombing and you're part of this group. So it's the protecting the team thing, but also, you know, what would have been your goth, emo, whatever group you were as a teenager, that you find a sense of belonging that's kind of now being part of the group is the identity, and you go along with the language and the labels and the whatever else nonsense because you and the detransitioners have talked about this in terms of you stay for as long as you do, because if you come out of it, you're out of it. You're, you know,
you lose everything. It's like leaving a church or leaving a cult. You know, you'll lose your resources, you leave your community. You know, there's a reason the United States is so much more religious than the United Kingdom. That's because there's not much of a social safety net in the United States.
Yeah.
Which means you have to find a community to cling to find help and support, you know, and that's what churches are. They're support networks. People need, they need their churches because they don't have, they don't have a lot of social safety. They don't even have healthcare. So if you lose your religion, you have to go along with it still, or you lose everything. You know, you could lose your life even if you're in a small town, and it's all completely deeply religious. You get excommunicated. There's a lot of that going on with gender identity ideology. You play along with this, or you lose your community. This, to a degree, has happened to me. You know, I'm a gay man. I was never, well, I did become a super sort of scene gay for a few years there. I was working at a gay bar, and I was just always hanging out in the gay village and blah, blah, blah. But personality-wise, I've never been much of a scene gay. You know, like I don't really listen to Madonna, that kind of thing. I'm more of an indie rock kind of guy. And I don't sort of wear sort of kind of stereotypically gay men stuff.
When I first moved to London, so prior to moving to London, I was there at my university. I was well, not immediately before London, but when I was at university, I DJ'd and promoted student club nights at the bar. So Saturday night was like, I just DJ. It's like having a private party. It was brilliant. I DJ'd.
Oh, that's awesome.
All my friends were there. So the last night of term in my final year was the last night of that bar before it was closed down and we moved to a new venue. So it was like a big night. We had an extended license. I put together a playlist of all the music I wanted to, like my favorite stuff. And I had like 10 hours of stuff I had to cut down. When I first moved to London, the guy I was seeing and his friend and flatmate, who was gay, wherever we would go straight up to the DJ and request Kylie, Madonna, Girls Aloud, Britney. So for like 3 years, that's really all I heard. Having gone from, I've got this vast catalogue of music that I love. This is all we listen to. Yeah. And not that I don't like any of those, but like not just those. So
I know. Yeah. Those are fun. I like I like me some Spice Girls, S Club 7. So
I like but these days it's kind of, I'd be too tempted just to go and put stickers everywhere if I went out in Soho. So
I know, right? Oh my god, yeah. Working at a gay bar, I had to listen to so much like kind of sort of candy pop music, and I kept trying to put on different music and I get in so much trouble. It's like, no, you got to play the candy pop. The gays want to hear the candy pop. It's like, all right, some, you know. But yeah, stickering. I've lost the village. I'm not in the village anymore. I don't really hang out in the village. I miss it. I miss gay bars. I miss them a lot. I want to come to London and hang out with some gay people really badly.
That idea of community, and I know different people don't really like using the word community, and I'm always LGBT community. I'll always quote like that. But that sense of it being very different things, and I feel like several people talked about this as well. Like kind of once we kind of fix the gender identity ideology thing, we need to do that because there's actually other things that, like, in terms of other things to do with women's rights and other things to do with gay rights that we need to get on with, and this is just in the way. But for me, I think if we get the gender clinics for kids thing sorted and some of the legislative things sorted, actually the first big area is that we need to split this again. This is two different communities. I feel, even aside from how planned and strategic and political a T bolting itself on has been, you know, and there's obviously the Denton's document, and there's a whole intentionality to how that's been done.
Right.
Even if that wasn't the case, even if that wasn't the case, I kind of feel like I want to have a sign that says trans people deserve their own movement. Like, you don't need, like, it shouldn't be LGB without the T. The T should be saying T without the LGB. Like, we don't need to be the same movement. And I feel that's kind of where I that kind of feels like that's the next battle for gay rights, is actually establishing and fixing a lot of the misinformation of the last decade.
Yeah,
Now,
it's really strange. Gay isn't a lifestyle. Gay isn't an identity. Gay is a sexual orientation.
Yeah.
So if you call yourself queer, that doesn't mean jack shit.
Yeah.
Do you fuck men, or do you fuck women, or do you fuck both? Are you married and sexually attracted to men? Are you sexually attracted to women? Or are you sexually attracted to both? Do you want to have romantic relationships with men, women, or both? This is what makes you gay.
Yeah.
This is it's not an identity. It's not a hairstyle. Queer haircuts. Have you heard of this? Yeah. I got a queer haircut because of COVID lockdown. I had to express my queerness. It's like, what the fuck? There's no such thing as a queer haircut. Are you homosexual, heterosexual, or bisexual? You know, this is what it is. And people are treating it like it's just an identity movement. But that's kind of the problem, is people don't want to acknowledge that being gay isn't just like you're fun and fammy of being a gay man. It means you have sex. I think people don't want to talk about the sexuality aspect of it. So that's kind of an issue around trans too, is people don't want to talk around the sexuality of it. You don't identify as a woman. Sometimes you do. Sometimes it's a gender expression issue. It's a big, there's a lot of different reasons you would identify as transgender. Yeah. But it's usually an expression of your sexuality and your sexual interests, you know?
Yeah.
I've lost my train of thought there, but so like all these letters being added on, treating it like it's an identity, that's wrong. And the trans movement has lots of resources just for itself. There are lots of organizations that lobby just for trans. There's no reason we shouldn't be allowed to have lobby organizations that fight for the rights of same-sex attracted people, homosexuals and bisexuals. You know, there's no reason. When people say these outrageous things about LGBT Alliance and all of its subsidiaries throughout the world, I just get so appalled and shocked that gay people aren't allowed to advocate for our own rights anymore, especially when we need to, because gender identity ideology, this new religious movement that says there's no such thing as homosexuality because sex doesn't exist, is actively hostile to gay people in a very tangible, material, dangerous way. You know, headlines in the Times of London to our American viewers or Canadian viewers or non-British viewers. The United Kingdom has something called the Tavistock, which is the gender clinic in the UK's NHS for young people. Something like 40 people have left that organization and blown the whistle that it's just a mill for homophobia. It's a mill for converting gay kids into trans people. Can you imagine, you go to school, you go to university, you get a degree in therapy or in medicine, and you want to work with trans people because you hear deeply about the transgender community, and then you get your dream job working with what are called trans kids, and then you start working as a clinician treating trans kids, and then one by one you realize that these are just gay kids who are confused or who have homophobic parents or homophobic communities who are pushing them into a transgender identity. And then you have to become so disillusioned that you quit your dream job and go to the press and blow the whistle. And not one, not two, not three, but 40 people have done that now. These are not Christian conservative bigots who hate trans kids. These are people who dedicate their lives so much to the idea of trans kids. They got a job working as clinicians to help them. And then when they were faced with them, they realized that this was a complete, this was not what it was labeled and marketed as at all. And we're seeing that around the world. We're seeing all of these countries that, because they were so good-hearted with they were heart-washed, they wanted to help the LGBs and the Ts. They were jumping ahead with this idea of giving sex changes to young kids. And now they're all realizing the most progressive countries were the first ones to start doing this because they thought it was virtuous. So they're ahead of the curve, like Sweden and Finland and stuff. And now they're the first ones to realize this is a giant mistake and we have to pull back. So Finland and Sweden and the UK, France is starting to step up. It's really great. But people have to understand, if you want to be on the right side of history, history's arrow is saying do a massive U-turn and get away from transing kids. Yeah.
So I'm just conscious that we've just gone over an hour. So what I'm going to suggest to our audience is we're going to take a little break, and I shall put the second part of this up as a part 2, because I want to talk to you about the alphabet soup. I want to talk to you about drag. I want to talk to you about legislation. You just touched about the different international. So I've just been making notes, but there's still little stuff I want to talk about. So we're going to take a little break there. So this will be the end of part 1 for this video. So like and subscribe and all that stuff. And then eventually, when I have part 2, there'll be like a little thing will pop up on the screen. You can watch part 2 here. So we'll be back with that soon.
Great.